Thank you for coming. So I was due to talk yesterday morning that was going to prevent you from having lunch. Now I'm in between you and getting on a boat. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for coming. Any questions, feel free to shout out. I don't mind. You can interrupt me or you can wait till the end. Really don't mind. Used to it when I train, so feel free to make it as interactive as you want, really. Cool. So, I'm going to do a little talk on design thinking, and really, I guess, my lens as a BA. It's been kind of what I've been doing for 15, 20 years, dabbled in a bit of project management and other disciplines, but largely just been a BA. So it's kind of my take on this with my lens. Any BAs in the audience? Yeah, cool. Half? A little bit? That's fine. Yes, similar skill set in terms of what we're trying to do. I guess a bunch of product owners and heads ofs and stuff. All right, cool. So hopefully of some new things, maybe some interesting things. But yeah, so just looking back, I started my career in retail management, so really different to what I do now. And I was at Sainsbury's as a student and ended up just through laziness joining the management scheme and taking that career path. And one of the mantras we worked towards every day was essentially, making sure we're trading really well. So great, and this is obviously pre-24-hour trading. Sunday opening wasn't a thing, so we kind of shut at 7, which was quite nice. But being great for 8, which meant being ready to trade at the start of day, being good at lunch, so again, ahead of a busy period, and again, being ready at 5 o'clock because we wanted to go home and let the evening staff take over and just finish off kind of whatever needed to be done. But it gave us a real clear focus around what we needed to achieve that day, what were the key objectives, what we had to do, and enabled us to prioritize those really key doing things as opposed to the million things that does come up in a day, right? And we kind of get bogged down in stuff. So really nice focus that made, certainly from a retail operational perspective, made us focus on customers, wanting great displays, clean, vibrant, good availability, all that kind of classic stuff that we all want when we go shopping. And also meant really happy staff, or at least happier staff, because if it's working well, then it's generally a better place to work. But also meant that when problems came, we could analyze them and problem solve them like there and then, and actually get together, collaborate. We could see the problem, it's visual, and we could kind of work it through. So it gave us a great kind of focus for the day. And I think about the work that I do now as a BA, and I think because I'm operationally based, I haven't got a degree in IT, I've not been a coder or anything else, or a developer or an architect. I've always had a kind of customer business lens in the work I do. And so for me, things like BAMs, I don't know if you heard of them, but they're a business activity model, and you model out a conceptual to be, but focused on the doing things, the core things you've got to do to achieve success. And KPIs, business scorecards, how we're going to measure those key things and achieve success together. All ideally focused around customer needs and wants and benefits, and I can go on about this for like 2 hours, but again, I'm probably a pain in the arse at most companies I work in because I bang on about this stuff more than I do the bit they want me to do, which is requirements and modeling. But having a really clear focus on the need and the want and trying to be collaborative are all kind of things that I do now that actually I did when I first started but didn't really realize. Design thinking. Similar conceptually to a lot of things you may have heard. We spent 2 days talking about Agile and change and collaboration and culture. It's a lot of similar concepts here, right? But just a different framework here. And I don't often bang on. I don't walk around the office going, I'm design thinking and I'm doing this phase or that phase. I just pull techniques from each phase and try and use them to create better outcomes. But it does take, really good mindset, and often a beginner's mindset, almost a childlike mindset. If any of you children, right, they're great at asking why, or nagging you until they get the truth, but they really want to look at things from a different lens and get to the outcome they think is correct. So yeah, a nice little quote there, which you can use. And again, a load of similarities, right? Agile, lean, Kanban, design thinking, all require human beings. I'm sure the robots will come eventually, but for the time being, it involves us as people, collaborating, being creative. But actually, there's been some really good talks, one this morning on culture and how we do things, and that culture being really important in this sort of world, right? In Agile, when you're trying to fail fast, learn quickly, adapt, you've got to be willing to accept it as a culture and de-risk things. But again, getting down to that root cause, that problem. Let's solve the problem. Let's just not buy another tin can and put it in the architecture and think that's going to solve it. Let's get down to that root cause and empathize and understand the functional need, plus the emotional side and the wants and the problems and the unhappiness that people have, in their worlds. And experiment, visualize. And actually, it then enables us to take on some quite complex challenges. Because we break it down, and I love breaking it down to that root cause, it often simplifies this big, complex beast that we're trying to tackle. And sometimes taking that lens of, root cause and problem enables us to think clearly and produce, better outcomes that actually deliver, hopefully, sustainable change and value. So yeah, so design thinking, a bit of science, a bit of what BAs love to do, investigate, analyze, validate, and all that good stuff, but also a different mental approach as well, being more creative, investigating unknowns, looking at exceptions and alternates, but almost creating that kind of creative mindset where I can come out of my logical head and almost, be creative in the way I think, as well as, the way I work with people. So yeah, classically, that analytical problem-solving mind that I guess IT people have, BAs have, developers certainly have. But we'll research, we'll get all the ideas together, we'll analyze, investigate needs and wants and all that kind of great stuff. Pull ideas together, we'll consider different perspectives and begin to test, right? And adapt and test and learn and all that good stuff, which is that scientific side. But then thinking about the other side of the brain, actually I want to try and think about the box, but everything around it, right? And this is, again, everyone's favorite phrase of thinking outside the box, but it's the outside of it, the barcode and the external world that goes with it, and actually trying to be, I guess, really creative and working with people and multidisciplinary teams gives us that fresh perspective. And sometimes those nuggets come from having that collaboration and having different people work with us that creates kind of different, different ideas and different options. And there's this classic example, I'm guessing some of you may have heard of it, but I think it was in the US a few years ago, where a bus hit a bridge, and it hit the top of the bridge, right? So it was wedged in, it was stuck. And it was obviously stuck there for some time. Firefighters turned up, an ambulance and police, and probably a few engineers, really, really smart people, all talking about things like, let's cut some bricks off the bridge and let's chop the bus in half or chop the roof off, and all these other kind of, really great solutions. And it turned out that there was a couple of kids watching this kind of take place, and one of the kids went up to one of the firefighters and said, "Why don't you just deflate the tires?" And but again, a fresh perspective, right? Thinking about the problem with a different lens can often help solve the problem. And I guess I'm guilty, especially early in my career, of being, really logical and following the process or following the steps. But, fresh thinking, new ideas, we can actually solve quite a lot of problems without necessarily spending like a lot of money. And like children, right? What we all do, if any of you got kids, building blocks, love building, right? Make a tower, knock it down, realize there's a couple of things wrong, start again. You've learned a little bit along the way, and My son doesn't realise, but he's learned something, and the next time he's built it, there's maybe 2 to 3 blocks on the floor, and a tower gets built and gets knocked down, and we start again, right? Test, learn, and adapt. And what have we done for 2 years with COVID? We adapted quite rapidly to a changing situation and failed fast. If any of you homeschooled, I was rubbish at it for months probably. I think I got okay at it in the end, but I don't know. I'm sure my kids will tell you if I was any good. But we adapted fast and worked out solutions to solve problems. And somehow, let's try and take it, I guess, into the real world. So one example, and there's millions on the internet, right? You just got to Google it and there's millions of examples. But this is quite a nice, easy sort of visual depiction of how design thinking helped solve a problem that we all hate and all see daily, right? Car parking signs, when I can park, when I can't park, how much is it going to cost? There's an external app that you've got to download, and et cetera, it's permit, bay, and all this sort of stuff. And often these signs are not really by the bay it's referring to. So you stood there going, is that on my left? Is it on my right? But the internal view is I've got some information I need to tell people. Right? So when you're thinking through this internally, it's like, well, okay, what am I going to have to do? How do I tell people? Create a sign. The next person comes along, you're now going to have a permit, so there's a new sign comes up. And it builds and builds and builds, and all of a sudden, you can have chaos. But using design thinking, the team that were on this project looked at it from the customer lens and looked at the problem and understood the real need of the customer was just finding out when they can park and when they can't park. And if they can park in this scenario, how long can they park for? But putting it into the customer's, mindset and understanding their needs and their wants enabled them to think of a different visual solution. That also then meant that anyone with any learning impairment, or I'm not a fan of the term, but if you're colorblind or have any sort of impairment, you can kind of read it and understand it as well, with obviously the red lines meaning you can't park. So aim to be, as much as it could, accessible and inclusive for everyone, or at least as many people as possible, and a lot easier to understand than a whole bunch of signs. So again, thinking about the problem differently enabled this team to come out with quite a nice little scenario. So design thinking, what does it involve? 5 steps. It's a bit small, isn't it? Can you see that? I'm guessing you can't. It looks okay on the laptop. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Essentially, 5 interlocking steps that aren't meant to depict, it's probably done it incorrect, but it's not meant to depict that classic waterfall, feasibility, requirements, design, develop, etc. All really meant to be interlocking, interlinking, so that you can go back and forth. So if you get down to prototype and you realize what I've designed and built doesn't actually solve the problem, you can go back a step, either to ideate or to define and just correct whatever you think needs correcting. But again, easier said than done. Culture is a big part of it, as much as trying to adopt this way of working, Agile, Kanban, any other form. So empathize, right? Understanding user, God, it's light. Understanding user needs and wants, and really taking time to put them first. And again, back in my world, I'm doing requirements, and I'm kind of, I guess early in my career, quite focused on the internal process, the internal way of doing things and the need, and not really thinking about customers and users and their functional need, but also the emotional need. What makes them happy, what makes them sad, what are their wants and desires, and building some of that into the end solution. So it's actually like a really, ideally great all-round solution for everyone. So empathizing, really important, and we'll look at it in a bit of detail in a minute. Define, essentially coming out of the problem statement, an agreed collaborative problem statement that we can then take forward and ideally have loads of ideas. And more the better initially, right? That we then funnel into one that we then prototype, visualize, again, all collaborative, all kind of great, working together, that we can then put into test and actually put it live, as it were, but test and learn and adapt as we go. So empathize. Again, so this guy's done okay. So I think quoting him is probably safe. But you need to put yourself in their shoes. And I kind of use that a lot in the last few years of my work to try and, my requirements, user stories, whatever you want to call it, right? But actually, how does it reflect me fully understanding the user and understanding their wants and, and their needs? It's really important. But yeah, understand from our perspective, do our research, really get under the skin of our customers and our users, right? They could be internal as much as external, but really, really understand them. And try and remove, as best we can, our own bias, our own preconceptions about how we think they should do it, or how they should do it, or how I want them to do it, right? Or how my boss wants them to do it, maybe. And try and remove all of that, that preconceived notion of things that we have, and really understand it from the customer lens. And when we analyze and validate the information, actually put them first and don't go back into, well, the business can only do that, or the process is this, and therefore it can't be done. But really put that customer first and be compassionate in some of that. Again, learning about the other side of the brain, right? The feeling side, compassion, empathy, and building that into our learnings can really help dictate, how we end up, solutionizing in the end. One thing I learned, I was at Whitbread a few years ago, and we did some customer journey mapping and some process modeling and stuff. And the booking process, fairly simple. In a nutshell, go online, choose a date, choose a room, kind of, bingo, quite easy. But when we got onto empathy mapping and the customer journey maps, when you actually arrive in a hotel, it's a very different experience, right? If you're a parent with small kids, if you're a business traveler, if you're a tourist, you've got very different needs and wants walking into the hotel and at reception, right? Nothing worse than being in a hotel reception with two kids and there's some person at the reception desk talking about the 10 attractions of Falmouth and Somerset, right? All you want is to get your key and disappear. And we can build some of that stuff into how we then think about, ideas and solutions. So again, don't judge, empathize, but really critically have a clear and open mindset in all that we're doing, right? And almost forget the constraints and the world of our business and what that maybe limits us to. And I guess for me as a BA, love it because I'm being a pain with everyone. I'm really trying to get down to root cause, understand the who, the why, the when, the where, and all that good stuff, and really getting down to the problem and the root cause, and really understanding it at its lowest level of detail. That then enables me to then kind of work through the process a bit better. And it still surprises me how many people forget this stage, irrespective of Agile or design thinking or waterfall, but kind of skip over the problem, and because we know that SAP and whatever, right, the shiny tin can is going to solve the problem. But does it really? And so, working through this logically, I personally think really important. Again, I was actually speaking to somebody earlier about this slide, and they kind of made a good suggestion that I probably should visualize every technique on a slide, which would probably go in theme of what we're talking about. So maybe for my task next week and the week after is to maybe visualize these, one per slide maybe. But loads of techniques, and there's more, right? There's always more, there's loads of books on techniques and you can go on for ages. But things like stepwise refinement or the 5 whys, never believing the first thing that we're told. Again, I remember when I was at Whitbread and I was in a warehouse, and I was doing a 3-day just assessment of what's happening and modelling out some stuff. And I was watching at about 4 o'clock. This young lady got off her seat and went to the printer, and just stood there. And reams, and literally, I can't even describe how much paper was being printed. Just one after the other. And I kind of went up to her after about 15 minutes and said, what are you doing? She went, well, I'm printing off today's store orders. I went, okay. Sounds a bit strange, but let's go with it. And I said, so why are you doing it? She went, well, I was told to do it, so I'm doing it. Okay, fine. What do you do with this paper? How long does it take? And she said it takes about sometimes 45 minutes. It can take longer if the toner finishes and the printer gets hot and all that sort of stuff. And we put it in a room, and it just sits there. And literally, this room was just full of paper, dated, but piled and piled and piled. Didn't accept that as a reason to do it. The management didn't really know. Yeah, we've always done it. I was told to do it. Somebody said do it, and the bloke before me did it, and et cetera, et cetera. 2.5 weeks later, I'm quite stubborn in some ways, as my wife will tell you, I was in legal. And it turned out there was a line in the contract that just said, you will print every day the store orders. Which is fine when you've got 10 stores or 50, and it's quite a small operation. But with 2,500 branches, some are really, really busy, it turned out that we were, doing all this stuff and simply stopped. Next day, wasn't done again. And that paper went into the recycling, done. Time, cost, all saved. But yeah, keep asking why. Visualize it with a fishbone diagram. Don't know if you've used that before, but a great collaborative technique to when trying to understand why and cause and effect. Visualize it, collaborate, get people in, really discover and understand real problems. Interviewing stakeholder maps, again, BAs love kind of understanding stakeholders, but the key thing there isn't just identifying, it's understanding perspective. So understanding people's perspectives, right? And then when you go to interview them and meet them and talk to them, that perspective really helps. Again, thinking about the other side of the brain, the empathy bit. Customer journey maps, again, probably fairly well used in the Agile world. But again, not just thinking about the internal process, thinking about, if I'm buying a card, my internal process model will be receive order, receive query, whatever, process something, pay for product, deliver product, et cetera, et cetera. But the customer journey map starts off with me thinking about wanting to buy a card and ends with me handing a card to somebody and what I do and say at that time. Depicts all the activities in that process, and also the perceptions and the feelings that I'm going through in that journey. So again, building both sides of the brain. Then also leads me to work out what improvements can I make to that whole entire journey, as well as the bits in the middle that I'm probably directly going to get involved in. So yeah, a bunch of techniques. Spaghetti diagrams I love if you worked in pubs or depots or retail or hotels. Really good to show the chaos between people, machinery, objects. Again, really good visual way to show what sometimes is chaos. And you can write it in 15 paragraphs, or you can just draw it and it kind of makes sense that you've got to move the till to the left and save somebody, spending 5 minutes constantly walking up and down. But yeah, some really good techniques. De Bono's 6 hats, another really great one. Any of you used that before? Heard of it before? Useful? Giving it a go? People enjoy it or a bit funny with it? A bit of both? Can be quite hard sometimes. Yeah, but really good, right? A different coloured hat, different perspective. So depending who's in the room, one's finance, one's HR, one's operations, whatever it might be. And by wearing the different hats, again, you get a different perspective of the problem. So you begin to understand, empathise somebody else's, viewpoint, making it less about adversarial kind of one-on-one, but encouraging collaboration, creativity, understanding, and empathy. So yeah, a few techniques, loads more. I won't go into too much because it'll be 8 o'clock pretty quickly. And so define really is about the problem statement. We've done all that hard craft, which is more than just requirements and the classic things that we tend to do. And we want a clear problem statement, a really easy to understand problem statement that we can evaluate, interrogate, interpret. And I love provoking people in workshops, right? Getting a bit of debate, getting a bit of heat, always good, as long as it's done professionally, but, there shouldn't always be happy faces and everyone smiling, but a bit of debate is good, really kind of get under the skin of things. But agree, a really clear problem statement that's collaborative, and the how might we is, again, a nice phrase to think about. And the we being it's collaborative, right? It's not just your thought or my thought, it's together, The might, creating that kind of safe place that people can work with. And also the bearing in mind is probably going to be more than one way. But again, just a nice phrase maybe to use if adopting this kind of style of working. And again, for those of you in Agile, probably very familiar with some of this stuff, but visualize it, constantly visualize, throughout the whole thing. And again, a load more techniques that one could use, but storyboard, storytelling, context mapping. But important to think about as well, defining success. And not that you probably won't nail it here, but important to think about, if I'm going to agree a problem statement, what metrics should be in place? How am I going to measure when this thing happens, if it's successful? Because I want to shout about it, right? I want to tell people. So again, important to start thinking about that. And things like a vision cone, again, keeping an eye on the bigger picture. Just making sure that this problem statement and what we're about to agree on still relates back to the bigger picture and trying to achieve that 3-year strategy, 5-year plan, whatever it might be that we're working towards. Oops, come back. And then now we get into the phase where it becomes a bit less certain, right? We're kind of heading into more uncertain territory, the future. The kind of, let's have a think now, how am I going to solve this problem? But options, right? I'm now got to go and buy a shiny tin can from procurement. What are my options? How am I going to, let's have a real creative, open discussion and create loads of ideas, discuss them, thrash them out, and then over time converge onto one. So the concept of convergent, divergent thinking, quite key here. Culture is obviously really key, right? You've got to be free. Again, I've been at some quite hierarchical places where trying to create and be free in thinking is, you don't really want to do that because the manager's there and one bad thing, or if you're going to give them more work, it's going to look bad and, the whole thing crumbles, right? And you can't be free or creative in kind of our thinking. But you really want to try and encourage that freedom to create. Brainstorming, great, obviously, right? Creative, fun, generally quite quick, and you can hopefully come out with loads of ideas. You can visualize it maybe with a 2x2 matrix, or Kano analysis, maybe more familiar in the Agile world, thinking about those wow features, basic features, performance features. But even thinking about if brainstorming doesn't work, under the banner of special brainstorming, the negative brainstorming, could that work, right? And maybe thinking about what might make the problem worse before thinking about the creativity and all the ideas. Maybe think about the negative side of it and get people to think about that, maybe, and how that could impact. Yeah, analogies. Again, as BAs, quite important that we're going out to the marketplace, looking at other sectors, what they're doing, how they're doing it, maybe other countries, looking at tech that's coming out of South Korea, which is obviously a massive tech center, Silicon Valley. Africa now is blossoming, and there's so much going on in that part of the world. What could we use maybe that's happening over there? But again, thinking about, can we measure this stuff as well? Really important to make sure that whatever idea we end up with, we can measure. Really important, right? That we measure the idea that we're going to implement and hopefully show success. And then visualize, which is more visualization, right? Prototype, bring to life the idea that we've agreed upon and bring it to life. Yeah, test it. Again, back in the old days in an office, we used to use paper and pen and do this stuff. Use bits of, we made a model shop at the post office when I was there, just using bits we found in the office. Before actually getting technical and trying to create a shop, but just mocked up a mini shop using day-to-day materials. Yeah, but start visualizing, collaborating, again, all those same principles, but, develop the idea together. And so wireframing, prototyping, MVPs, kind of, I'm guessing, all fairly familiar concepts for a lot of you. But build that prototype, from that kind of low fidelity wireframe. And when ready, we'll get to test it and get to use it, get feedback, learn more. Sometimes even an opportunity to prototype some blue sky ideas, just to see what could happen or what might happen. Sometimes it's just the high-risk options that, spring to life. One of my favorite interviews of Elon Musk is the one where, many years ago, and he's asked a question that was around, so you're going to build electric cars, how are people going to recharge them? Was the basic question. And the answer was, well, I'm going to build a network for people to charge their cars. The laughter in that room, right? Almost demeaning the fact this guy is thinking that grandiose. But, that high-risk option for him kind of paid off. But sometimes we need to think, in this way to sometimes produce, really good solutions. And then we get to test, the final bit, right? So we've done all that hard work. And remember, if the prototype doesn't fit the need, we should be able to go back, right? And either redefine the problem or learn some more about customers. Or maybe it was idea number 7 on that list. The idea that no one talked about and just, abandoned for whatever reason. Maybe that idea, because now we know a little bit more. So maybe let's just go back and, build that idea as a prototype and see what happens. But test, right? Learn, adapt, all those classic words that we've probably been hearing now for 2 days, right? Test, learn, adapt, iterate, change, fail fast, all these kind of really great words to build into language and culture. And reflect. Yeah? Almost a constant state of beta. Really, constantly evolving, constantly changing. And again, loads of different, it's probably a bit too small, isn't it, as well? I'll make it a bit bigger. But, different ways and techniques that we can use when testing. Right? Love it, change it, leave it. Quite a nice fun way to evaluate and think about, the test that we've just performed. I wish, I wonder. Another quite nice technique that can be used. Again, those using digital, probably usability testing, A/B testing, another really cool way to, show different home pages to different segments maybe of customers. I've used it a few times in hospitality and leisure and supermarkets. Quite really great to understand how different pages and how different segments interact with those pages. Retrospectives, lessons learned. I'm guessing, I won't mention waterfall, but more of a term that's used in waterfall, but, retrospectives being, I guess the Agile kind of name that's used to reflect and learn. But again, also important to think about the roadmap, right? Just making sure that we're fully aligned to the plan and what we're promising to achieve, and it all syncs up and is part of that bigger story. Yeah, it's a test. Oops, going back again. Don't want to do that. So I guess for those that aren't doing it or are new to either Agile or design thinking or frankly anything new, right? And again, thinking about COVID and all the things we tried and failed and we had to adapt to our daily life. We all became designers at home. We were faced with, just because Boris said we're now in lockdown, we had to deal with the fallout, right? Schools, maybe, kids, working at home, potentially. I had a wife who works in care, so she was fully committed and still is a lot of the time, based on COVID scenarios. Had to adapt, right? Had to work it out and fail fast, learn, adapt, work out what I'm going to do better. So how do we take that stuff into the workplace and the real life, professional environment? Because often, again, we go back to those preconceived ideas at work. Can't do it, the constraints, this is not how we roll, this is how, we're not Google, so therefore we can't do it. But, what's stopping us? So find a small problem. Maybe. Find a small project that maybe you can try something new. Yeah? And there's a technique that I use when I'm working on projects around stakeholder analysis. It's called CATWO. But no one knows what that means. Frankly, no one cares, right? And nor should they care. But I use that technique more for the way it makes me think about asking questions about a stakeholder to elicit the information I need. And it's all about understanding the stakeholder perspective, which is what the kind of 6 letters mean in the acronym. But I don't walk around the office going, this is what I'm doing, and put it on a chart and tell the world. But maybe the evolution, and as opposed to the revolution, and just start doing some of these things. Tweaking how you run a workshop, tweaking how you look at problems, trying to get people away from the solution potentially, and just try and build it in. I think, a couple of points there. If you're struggling, for example, with a customer review, you have a workshop and you can't work it out, and but I put that live and we were on budget and the analytics isn't showing me what it should do, or I can't quite determine a picture, right? Go and speak to customers. Right? Why aren't they filling it in, or why are they filling out loads of bad reviews, or whatever it might be? How often in a work are 2 people constantly arguing, or departments just clashing, and we accept it and just kind of go, yeah, just the way it is. We're going to live with it. We always have done. Actually, why not use the 5 steps? You don't have to literally go through it, but use the framework and work through getting people together, collaborating, talking through the problems they have, agreeing some problem statements, and then letting them ideate and work out how they can solve this problem. Because most of the time, a lot of things are fairly easy to solve. Yeah. So start small sometimes. Revolution can be quite hard, unless you've got big buy-in and a big consultancies come in and said, we're now Agile, right? And then everyone is suddenly Agile. But often evolution can be just as effective. And again, just finishing up on a nice little quote. People love change when it doesn't happen to them, right? I've experienced it a million times as a BA, and I'll probably continue to do so. But if change is for the better, then hopefully it's a good thing. Right, party time. I think that's not strictly true, because there is another talk, I think, in 10 minutes, but the boat and Friday night and sunshine is rapidly approaching. So do get in contact, LinkedIn, phone, email, etc., etc. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you. Yeah, I guess what I meant was MVP. Normally from the prototype, you end up with those core functions and features that you need to go live with, right? So generally the MVP is a nice framework to then deliver against, as opposed to I'm going to deliver everything day one and half of it's not needed at all.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? Cool. No, we just spoke good.
Thank you for listening.
All right. Yeah,
thank you guys. Appreciate it.